Hello again and welcome back to another installment of Austin's American Flyer, where today we do some painting. Stick around. So a couple years ago I was fortunate enough to stumble across a junk box at a train show, and in that junk box were, I couldn't believe my eyes, a circus set, at least the engine and tender. Now, they were in horrific shape. There were certainly some parts missing, but the price couldn't be beat. And I like to fix things, so I thought, hey, let's give this a whirl. So after getting home with my brand new circus set, and I began to take a closer look at it, I suddenly realized I had a dilemma. This circus engine was original paint, so it wasn't a royal blue that someone took and repainted. And as such, it actually had some value to it. And if you've watched my videos, having flyer stuff with much value is not something I can really claim, which I'm okay with that. But I had this dilemma because if I repainted things, then in theory that took the value down because it's a repaint. And So what do I do when I don't know the answer? I turn to the American Flyer community. So I did that, a couple different Facebook sites primarily, and I just said, hey, here's what I've got. What should I do? And the responses were really clear. About half the people told me that there's no way I should repaint it because that'll impact the resale value. The other half said, hey, it's your thing, do what you want with it. So because my response was so very clear, undecidedly clear, I did the next best thing, or the only thing I could think of doing, and that is I put it up on the shelf and spent a year thinking about it. As I mulled this over, I came to a conclusion that you may disagree with, but I can live with this conclusion. There were kind of two primary things that for me became kind of the driver behind my decision. The first was the tender had some rust on it, and sooner or later that rust was going to drastically impact the metal and come to a point where either it was going to eat through the metal or make it a real challenge to do anything with it. So that was one issue. The second issue was, hopefully you've picked out over the times of watching these videos, is I'm very interested in seeing others come into the hobby. And so this layout and everything I do has that as a bias, has that as intentional. And I don't know how successful I've been, but I thought about if I had someone come to my house and I wanted to show them this hobby, what would be more appealing? Potential engine and tender that maybe were something but looked like they'd been through a war, or something that looked really, really nice, maybe didn't have the original value anymore, but certainly had value because it was nice and it ran well. So that's what I decided to do. I decided to go ahead and repaint this tender. So I don't know if that's of interest to those of you watching this or not, but it's been an interesting journey to kind of process through what do you do if you have something that has some value and potentially more value, leaving it in a destructed original condition versus repainting it. I imagine there are those of you out there that have struggled with the same thing. I'd love to hear kind of your comments. What drove you to one point or the other? I'm not saying that I came out in the right place. You know, I may have just ruined the value of this piece. But I'd like to hear from you guys. You know, what do you think? What would you do in this situation, or what have you done in a similar situation? Okay, this is after about 40 to 45 minutes. Still trying to figure out, you know, speed-wise, what's the best RPMs to have this running at. But as you can see, I think you can see, I can see anyhow, it is slowly but surely taking the paint off. And obviously the edges are getting it first, but I'm curious to see how well it does with the rust. Let's see how we're doing here on this guy. There's still quite a bit of rust on the body, or on the frame. And let's check out the coal load. A little bit less rust there on top, and definitely reduction on the inside bottom. So interesting. I don't have a clue where that ladder's at, but I can wait till later Hopefully it won't self-destruct. Okay, these have been tumbling, give or take 2 hours. And let's see what we got here. Well, still some rust there. Still some rust there. Well, I can't tell that can't really tell anything happened to that frame. Well, there's more paint missing. I was really hoping that rust would be removed, but looks like I'll get to do that another way. The ends I got some removal there. And let's see about, okay, well, that actually looks pretty good there. And yeah, cool. So the rust is off of that. Now for the challenge here. Okay. Well, this little guy is cleaner than it was, but still some rust on there. This was an experiment. What I really need to do is get a glass jar with a metal lid. I had a lot of problems with this not sealing well because the top cracked, and so I put about 5 or 6 different plastic covers between the top and to try and seal it, and then would screw it down, and well, it just worked okay, but not as good as probably it should have. There's also a sweet spot in terms of speed. As I listened to it, you know, if it was going too fast, then centrifugal force just pushed everything to the outside of the drum. So you wanted it to be just slow enough that it would actually tumble, and then as fast as you could go with it still tumbling, and that seemed to be where I would get the most sanding happening. But it's been an experiment, and like I said, I think if I had a glass jar, I would try this again. But there you go, folks. I know a lot of you have been using chemical baths to take paint off, and so I guess I will be joining the rest of you unless the rust comes off pretty easy with some hand tools. So I'll try that first, and then if that doesn't work, chemical bath it is. So after the unsuccessful tumble experiment, I had to figure out a way to get the rust off. One of the challenges with this particular tender is there were rivet punches in it, and the rust seemed to be close up against those rivets, which is why I was hoping the sand would take care of the tumbling. Speaking of sand, it's probably worth noting that I actually did not use true sand. I used some sandblasting material that I had received years ago that did have a little bit of sand in it, but it had some glass. I don't know what else was in it, but it wasn't purely sand. And I do wonder, based on some other times I've seen tumblers use that, had I used just pure 100% sand, if the results might not be improved. So again, one of the things that I will attempt in the future, possibly. So moving back to what we've got here, the challenge was, how do I remove the rust? Obviously not interested in removing any thing but the rust. I need to leave as much metal there as possible because I really did not want to do any body filling. Again, with having those rivets in place, to do any sort of body filling was going to just create a problem that would be hard to take care of, because as the material was built up or filled in and then sanded down, I was either going to build up and remove the actual rivets or sand the rivets off in the process of removing the Bondo or whatever body filler type of material I was going to use. So what I opted to do was skip filling in any of the rust areas that I removed rust and a little bit of metal from. Instead, I went to first some some 2400 grit sandpaper that I went just over the areas where I used the grinding tool on. Then I went to a piece of Scotch-Brite and went over everything to try and remove any additional paint or dust and rust from my grinding. Okay, so then after doing as much of sanding, cleanup as I could, I needed to remove the trucks from the frame, tender frame. And so I went to drill those rivets out, and that's what you see me doing here. And needed to get those parts removed again so I could really clean up the bottom of the tender frame. And I contemplated again, could I possibly re-blue this metal or chemically blacken the metal, which I believe is what they did originally. And I will try that at some point, but decided in this case I'm just going to paint things just to make sure that, again, I do the best I can to stop the rust. Put on first some base coat. This was just a rattle can, a Rust-Oleum base coat. Then after that dried, I went and did a gloss black for the frame, and I got a paint match for the Circus set or Circus color from Portline Hobby, and that's what I did the upper shell with. And I was very careful to do even coats, and I think before it was all said and done, I did a total of about 5 coats, leaving the appropriate amount of time between coats for the paint to dry and keeping it thin enough that you didn't get runnage. And then after it had dried for about a week, I wanted to put the decals back on. So here you see me using the calipers once again and some tape to measure out, as I did initially, to figure out, okay, what's the placement here of the decals, try to get them back in place. Finally, I had everything reassembled, at least in the component stage, and so now it was time to put things back together. And it was a bit more challenging than you might imagine to slide the coal load back in. I was trying very, very hard to not scratch any paint. So after reassembling everything, I decided to wait on bending the tabs over underneath the shell to actually lock it onto the tender chassis for 2 reasons. One is I needed to put some wires on there so I could do a test run with the engine once I got that rebuilt. And so I wanted easy access to that. The second thing was I was needing to order some additional parts for the engine, and I thought I'm just going to go ahead and order some new wiring for the tender. And so whatever I put in there, it was going to be temporary. But again, as I mentioned earlier, very happy with the results. Love the gloss on it. It is shiny, and And with again, with the clear coat that I put on there, just a clear lacquer, it just has a nice shine to it, and hopefully will hold up better than the original did in terms of resisting scratching. As always, thanks for your comments. There's a lot of wisdom out there, and I certainly don't claim to have any corner on that market. So I appreciate any feedback or stories that you out there care to share. I think as a community, as people that enjoy Flyer, have worked on them, as we share our experiences, I think it makes the hobby better, keeps it from being exclusive, and certainly makes it more approachable for those that are new and maybe want to break into the hobby and maybe have some pretty rundown equipment that they're not sure what to do with. So I'm sorry, I talked for quite a while, but as always, thank you so much for watching today. I hope you've enjoyed this, and as always, thanks a lot for sticking around. And if you've stayed this long in the video, stick around for just a couple more seconds, 20 seconds or so, and I'll give you a little bit of what's to come. All right, as always, take care, enjoy your Flyer, and God bless.